Hi, 7th graders. In this video, we're going to discuss protists. I think protists are really among the most interesting organisms that we've studied this semester because of their unique and completely weird cell structures. Also, I don't think you have ever seen or heard that much about protists until we explored them this trimester. So here we go. Protists are the junk drawer organisms. If you have a junk drawer in your house, you know that a junk drawer is where you put random things that don't really belong anywhere else. You can't really classify them into any drawer. They're not like any of your other things, so you shove them into the junk drawer and call it a day. Protists are exactly the same way. They're different from plants, animals, and fungi because they're unicellular, but they share characteristics of at least one, if not two or three of those different kingdoms. So we just call them protists. Scientists used to classify them into one kingdom called Kingdom Protista, but as they learned more about these organisms, they realized how different they were from each other. So now they're classified into many different kingdoms that we haven't learned about, containing many other different types of organisms. So what are they? What are protists? Protists are unicellular, which means they have one cell. They're eukaryotic, which means they contain a nucleus, unlike bacteria that have no nucleus. And they're microorganisms, which means they are teeny tiny. You can see them under a microscope, but when we looked at our live protists and we saw the containers, it just looked like water. But when we looked under a microscope, we saw that water was swarming with life. So again, unicellular eukaryotic microorganisms that don't fit into the plant, animal, or fungi kingdom. They have plant-like, animal-like, and fungus-like features. Not every protist has all of the features. Some have only animal-like features, some have only plant-like features, but some have both, and some have fungus-like features. Protists have really interesting cell structures, and they have many unique and different organelles. So if we look at the cells of protists, and as we go through the individual protists that we've learned about, you're going to see how vastly different the cell structures are. They don't look very much like animal cells. They don't look like plant cells. They look very unique. Protists typically live in water. So some protists live actually in other organisms. Some protists live by themselves in fresh water, but they like to get wet. They like to swim. And there are many different types of protists, even beyond what we learned about. But the protists that we learned about can really be classified into three categories. So these categories are amoeboids. The amoeba that we learned about is an amoeboid. Ciliates, which are classified ciliates, which paramecium is one of them. Flagellates, which the euglena and volvox that we learned about, they're both flagellates. So first let's talk about amoeboids. And the amoeboid that we got to see, both a live amoeboid and you drew the slide of a prepared slide of an amoeba. So that was the amoeba. So amoeboids are characterized by pseudopodia. Pseudopods are false feet. So pseudo means fake, pod means foot. So these pseudopods are used by the amoeboids to trap food and move around. So we have the cell structure of the amoeba is as follows. It's relatively simple. We have a cell membrane. We have the cytoplasm, which streams. The cytoplasm is the part of the cell, the jelly-like substance in the cell that holds the organelles in the cell. So this cytoplasm streams into pseudopods. These are the pseudopods, the false feet, many false feet that the cytoplasm extends into these false feet and then pulls the rest of the cell after it when it goes to capture food. And the amoeba is constantly changing shape. Here we see two pseudopods coming together to engulf and trap the food. So that's what pseudopods are used for, to trap food and move. Like I said, relatively simple cell structure. We have a nucleus because it's a eukaryote. We have the cytoplasm that holds the vacuoles, which really those are the only organelles. We have the nucleus and many vacuoles that hold food. Amoebas reproduce by binary fission, which is a form of asexual reproduction when the cell splits in two. And amoeba, they move around and capture food. So would you consider an amoeba to be more plant-like or more animal-like? So we're going to say definitely animal-like because it doesn't seem to have any plant-like characteristics, and it moves and captures food like animals. The next group of protists we're going to talk about is ciliates. And the ciliate protist that we learned about was the paramecium. But all ciliates are characterized by hair-like cilia. And cilia beat against the water, and they help move the ciliate protists like the paramecium through the water. And it helps those protists to move really, really fast. The paramecium are very, very speedy swimmers as they move through water to obtain food. So the cilia actually that surround the ciliates, especially the paramecium, has two roles. It's, like we said, to move the protist through water, and then as we see, the paramecium has an oral groove, which is like a mouth. So the cilia, as it moves the paramecium through the water, sweeps the food into the mouth, and it enables the paramecium to absorb and digest the food. So if we're going to compare the paramecium to the amoeba, we would definitely say that the paramecium has a much more complicated body structure, many more organelles. We see it has two nuclei, a micronucleus, the small one, and the macronucleus, the big one. It has a pellicle, it has vacuoles. So we see that it's a much more complicated structure. Paramecium are relatively small ciliates, like we saw when we looked at the live ones and the slides. They typically are never bigger than about 0.3 millimeters, and these paramecium reproduce by binary fission, which again, asexual reproduction, they split in two, and sometimes conjugation, which is the way that protists sexually reproduce. And paramecium typically reproduce sexually when in stressful situations such as overcrowding or other stressful environmental conditions. We also learned about two different flagellates, the euglena and the volvox. Flagellates are characterized by flagellum, which are whip-like extensions, sort of like a tail, that propel the organism through water. So we see that we have one flagella, one whip-like tail at the end of our euglena. Now the euglena also has a relatively complicated cell structure. We see something very different in the euglena than we saw in the amoeba and the paramecium. We see that there are green chloroplasts throughout the cell structure of the euglena. The chloroplasts help the euglena to make its own food. That's one way the euglena can get food, or the euglena just absorbs food through its outer covering. So that would make euglena sort of plant-like because, like plants, it's an autotroph. It can make its own food. But unlike plants, the euglena still, it has a flagella, it moves through water, and it doesn't necessarily have to make its own food. It can absorb food that it finds into its body. So euglena is really both plant-like and animal-like. Like the amoeba, it reproduces only with binary fission. The cell splits in two, making two completely new euglena. The last protist that we discussed is the volvox. And what makes the volvox different from the other organisms that we learned about is that it seems like it has many, many different cells. It's basically many different cells sticking together, moving together. So the volvox is a colony of 1,000 to 3,000 cells. These cells join together and they use their flagella to move them through water. They kind of look like soccer balls. They roll around pretty slowly. They can't, just like the euglena, they get food either by absorbing it or doing photosynthesis through the chloroplasts. So if we look, we see all those green spots in the volvox. They are chloroplasts that contain chlorophyll that will do photosynthesis. So again, the volvox is an autotroph. It can make its own food, but it also can absorb food. So it's still both animal-like and plant-like. The Volvox can reproduce through fission, asexually, or conjugation sexually. It does both. So I hope that you enjoyed this review. I hope it was helpful, and keep studying. I'm really proud of the work that you all have done this semester, and I just know that you're going to do great on the final. So, Bachrach. Bye.